What is this motley crew of construction workers, who you would never normally give a second glance passing in the street, got to contribute to D-Day? Surely building a hospital or school or even a road should come much later, when the fighting was all over. In fact, this US unit was an integral part of the success of Operation Overlord. By mid-1941, the mission of aviation engineers expanded beyond runway repair and light runway construction. Planners agreed to give the US Air Force enough men and equipment to construct their own heavy-duty bases in forward areas. The 834th Engineer Aviation Battalion was activated in May 1942 at Westover Field in Massachusetts, USA, as part of the 9th Engineer Command. Writing in 2002, Robert Price says, "The 834th Engineering Aviation Battalion was my outfit. At the time, the Army, which usually is a snafu outfit, got it sort of right with me, since I had worked beforehand with my father on steel tanks in the oil fields in Pennsylvania, where I grew up. With this background of civil engineering, I was well placed." Much of the equipment required can be seen in the film, rolling through the picturesque villages of northern Hampshire to the docks at Southampton, including diesel tractors, bulldozers, carrying all scrapers, graders, gasoline shovels, rollers, mixers, air compressors, drills, asphalting and concreting equipment, rock crushers, drag lines, and pumps. Besides the build-up of personnel and equipment in anticipation of the cross-channel invasion, the Engineering Aviation Battalion also constructed the bases used by the 8th Air Force prior to D-Day. On October the 24th, 1943, the 1st Air Force troops arrived, so the battalion were obliged to evacuate their self-built huts for tents, and were seldom billeted under a solid roof again until the end of the war. By May 1944, the plane-crowded airfields were more than double their capacity. The first aim for the Engineering Aviation Battalion in France was 2 emergency landing strips to be prepared in the first 24 hours, one each on Utah and Omaha beaches. Next was 2 refueling and rearming strips to be set up on Omaha Beach on D+3. Then came 4 advanced landing grounds on Omaha and 1 on Utah by D+8. And finally 5 advanced landing grounds on Omaha and 3 on Utah by D+14. The overall objective was 35 advanced landing grounds constructed during the first 40 days to accommodate 58 squadrons. Unlike the permanent airfields built in the United Kingdom for strategic bombing, the tactical combat airfields in France were temporary, often improvised airfields to be used to support the advancing ground troops. Once the front line moved out of range, new airfields were built and squadrons moved up closer to the ground forces, leaving those in the rear to be abandoned or for support use. In the film, the convoy is seen arriving at Southampton Dock Gate 8 of the Western Docks, which can still be seen today. The bulldozer is seen unloaded from a trailer alongside berth 101, with the Solent Mills now demolished in the background. The heavy machinery is seen loaded onto an LST at embarkation hut S1 adjacent to the present-day Mayflower Park. Berth 101 is now the site of the New Horizon cruise terminal, although the quayside remains the same as in 1944. The film follows a unit aboard the LST crossing the English Channel before waiting to disembark off the Normandy coastline. At Utah Beach at 10:50, the 1st Squad, 3rd Platoon of Company A of the 819th Engineer Aviation Battalion landed. When the ramp was lowered, the engineers waded the final 200 yards to the beach in waist-deep water, with tractors and graders following. Men and equipment dispersed on the beach with only 1 casualty and reached the construction site by 1800 hours. Work commenced immediately, with the strip completed by 21:15. The men had to then dig foxholes and spent their first night avoiding sniper fire. On June the 6th, Robert Price was attached to a forward unit of the 834th Engineering Aviation Battalion, which tried to land on Omaha Beach, but due to the heavy enemy fire had to tie up overnight next to an LST. The next morning they went ashore, and since the original site for the airstrip they were to build was still in enemy hands, found another area right above the cliffs, and by June the 8th planes were landing and taking off. These were the first Allied planes to operate in France since its fall, and for their efforts they were awarded the Presidential Unit Citation, which reads, "The 834th Engineer Aviation Battalion is cited for outstanding performance of duty in action against the enemy from June the 6th to the 16th of July 1944. Advance elements of the 834th Engineer Aviation Battalion were scheduled to land on the Normandy beachhead at H+4 hours on D-Day with the mission of constructing an emergency landing strip, but because of intense enemy activity the initial group was not able to begin its work until D-Day +1. Finding that the ground forces had not yet taken the site upon which the unit was to construct an emergency landing strip, the battalion promptly reconnoitred the terrain available, and within the space of 16 hours a new site had been located and the landing strip made serviceable. Without pause, the unit continued to develop the initial strip into a 3,400-foot landing strip, which was usable on the 7th of June by transport aircraft evacuating wounded. For the entire period, 6th of June to the 16th of July, this strip handled the major portion of transport air traffic between the continent and the United Kingdom. During the first weeks, the engineers averaged 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. Units withdrawn from construction to perform maintenance work on other airfields considered their 10-hour workdays as a rest. They were able to keep up their long hours and maintain a high morale because results were clearly and immediately evident as planes took off and landed as soon as the runways were completed. By the end of the war, they had constructed or rehabilitated 241 airfields.